about that whole event and says, you told the U.S. Attorney's Office that it might be his bipolar disorder.
So she's clearly raised that, or they've raised that flag.
Right.
They raised something else.
By the way, Cassie's response to that was, I don't recall saying that exactly.
Now, they raised something else, though. That when they were talking about the 2016 beating, which now everybody has seen on that surveillance video, they raised an issue asking her whether he was in the middle of a blackout.
Yeah.
And it really is kind of the same thing they're doing, which is to explain brutality. I mean, I don't know how else.
And I don't know how that's gonna.
I don't know how that's gonna go either.
Right.
I mean, I think they're. It's like sometimes if it goes so far when you see in this video that you say
you try make any attempt to explain it, it's gonna could rub a juror the wrong way. That
absolutely.
How dare they?
How dare they? And because a lot of people thought that what the defense should be doing is being harder on Diddy than the prosecution was.
Right.
And to own that and to, and not to try and make an excuse. This is kind of an excuse.
Well, I think it's part of a two-pronged attack. A lot of the testimony is about trying to show that Cassie was participating consensually. The other prong is Diddy was not in his right state of mind. I think you're 100% right, though, by even raising these issues of his mental fitness at a particular point in time. That dog doesn't hunt over an 11-year relationship filled with violence. It may work for one instance, like the 2018 episode. If it's a manic episode where he's raping her and he had never raped her before, maybe that's helpful to him, but I just don't think it works over the course of an 11-year relationship.
Except the other way they're kind of attacking it, which they did today, which I found kind of interesting. They played an audio tape that somebody had threatened to release a sexually explicit video of Cassie.
She was speaking to, yes, and she was, in this audio, you hear her threatening the person.
I will kill you. I will blank you up, essentially. And, what they're trying to show is that they were both violent, that there was violence going both ways. Again, I don't know how that is going to fly with the jury, but that's clearly why they're bringing that up. They're trying to show she's not just under his spell.
Under his spell, right.
Exactly.
Yeah, but the cognitive dissonance of the jury being able to look at that video of her not defending herself, not fighting Diddy in that hotel room is going to be a tough thing to overcome.
And that's interesting because she addressed the aftermath of that video on the stand.
There were text messages shown in court, read aloud. These were just a few days after the hotel beating, and Cassie texted him, when you get blanked up the wrong way, you always want to show me that you have the power, and you knock me around. I'm not a rag doll. I'm someone's child.
That's powerful. That is really powerful. That is really powerful. And it was her, this was not her saying, well, that's kind of our relationship.
But if you're wondering why the defense would bring it up, right after that, it seems like they make up. The text messages now, after she says that, have a more lighthearted tone where he says, let's just forget about Friday, and has an LOL in there, and then she responds with an LOL, and it seems like everything's hunky-dory again. And that's why the defense really brought this up, to show, yes.
Do you think that works? Do you think that works to say,
I personally don't, but I think they are basically throwing out every theory possible so that the jurors have that in the. They only need one juror to have it.
I understand that,
head.
but you can't do a kitchen sink defense. You have to have a narrative, and I thought at the beginning their narrative was clear that this was a mutually violent relationship where they were both swingers, that they were both into freak-offs and everything else. And you go down a lane and you make that point. Now it's like, well, you felt like a rag doll the day after, but then you made up. Well, that's what happens to domestic violence victims, that they react, and then the other person says, oh, don't leave me, I love you, and then they stay, and then it happens again.
And you would think,
I mean, I don't know where this gets to the defense, honestly. It just seems to me, honestly, it sounds like a basic misstep to me.
Well, if they we'll see what happens when prosecutors redirect. I would imagine that's what they're going to bring up.
The prosecutors just begun their redirect a few minutes ago, and one of the first things they said was, you've been shown a lot of text messages and been forced to read all these loving and kind text messages to each other. Did that always, did that last very long? And Cassie was like, no, there would immediately be a downward swing. And whether that was because of Diddy's bipolar disorder or his drug addiction, because we learned that he had overdosed at one point in 2012, this is just a classic narcissistic abusive relationship on both parts, but it makes sense. It's kind of like classic for an abusive, for her to react that way, go back and forth.
I mean, that's classic domestic violence, that somebody beats somebody and that person who's beaten says, might even say, I'm going to leave, and the other person says, oh no, I love you, don't leave, and then they stay, and then it happens again. Right. And that's what, right? By the way, Janet just said that they're doing redirect right now, and one of the reasons is the clock is ticking, and I'm not just talking about the courtroom clock.
Cassie has to get out of that courtroom. Prosecutors made a big deal early this morning saying to the judge, we need to stick to the schedule, which was that Cassie would only be here through Friday. They're concerned, the prosecutor's office, is that she's going to go into labor. Not necessarily in court, but if she goes into court while she still goes into labor while she still needs to finish testimony, like maybe this weekend.
Exactly. And another thing that might come into play here is that we've heard from our producer who's inside the courtroom that everybody in that courtroom is sick. The defense attorney that was cross-examining Cassie sounded like she had bronchitis or something, like lots of mucus. A lot of the jurors were coughing. So that could potentially put her at, such a risk because she's pregnant.
Yeah. That's actually really interesting, Janet. I didn't know that. And that, by the way, that could also stop the trial if a jury gets sick and can't come to work.
Right.
And can't come to, they may recess for a couple of days. But what they said yesterday, our producer Brian is in the courtroom, is that they said that they were concerned that Cassie's due date is such that she could go into labor as early as this weekend. So,
is there a world, I know you said there's no way that they would ever declare mistrial, but in the extreme case, she did go into labor today on the stand. Isn't there an argument that is very prejudicial against Diddy?
No. What does it have to do with anything?
That sitting there reliving all of this has made you go into labor?
No. It is not a mistrial.
Charles, let us just handle this one. That's not a mistrial. Like, good effort. I appreciate like a student in a class.
I don't need him to be patronizing.
We're not patronizing.
No,
it's not a prejudice. I know what you're saying, but the fact that she's pregnant is, you could say, prejudicial, right? I mean, that she's coming into court this way. You can make that.
You can't avoid.
Well, then what's the difference? I mean, the natural end of it is having the baby.
Is that she's going to have the baby at some point, but she has it, I don't know, weeks early.
She was due. I mean, she's not due. She's due at the end of the month, they say, so come on.
Hi, my name is Buddy Pearson. I'm coming to you from Austin, Texas. I agree. I think that the team is trying to throw everything they can because they know that this is a sinking ship. It doesn't seem to be working. I think that they're doing literally anything to try to grasp at straws. It doesn't justify what he did, whether he is a bipolar or not, or whether he was blacked out. I just think that they know that the ship is going down. As far as her being pregnant, I think that her team is trying to get her off the stand because she said a lot of things that, depending on the interpretation, could almost make it seem like she was, going back and consenting, even though I think with the body of evidence that we have, that's probably not the case. But I think that they want her off the stand. Obviously, she looks like she's about to pop. But I think that they're trying to get her from ruining part of this argument, definitely. This whole thing is so crazy and ever evolving.
So we have a weekly show now for the duration of the trial called TMZ Presents United States versus Sean Combs Inside the Diddy Trial. It is available for free on Tubi. We drop it every Thursday night.
Yep,
updated
every week.
And we have you should see Nancy Grace and Mark Garagos go at it. Woo! It is something. Okay, we're taking a break.
When we come back, the long-standing rule